You're listening to Agile for Humans with Ryan Ripley. Learn more at ryanripley.com.
Hello, listeners. Ryan Ripley here. Just wanted to let you know, coming up in May, actually on May 10th and 11th, I'm going to be at Project Con in Indianapolis. Really awesome event. ProjectConEvent.com is the website. We got Dave West from Scrum.org keynoting. I'll be there. I'll have a coach's booth, a huge setup for you to come and meet and greet and say hello to me and many of past guests on the show. Brian Lockhart, Natalie Warner, Jessica Soroki, Jesse Fuel, Ben Kopel. Let's see, who else? Ben Day, fellow PST and trainer, Nabila Safdar. Ton of great talks, really awesome location and venue. Project Con, May 10th and 11th. Check it out. I think you're really going to like it. Indianapolis is wonderful that time of year. I hope to see you there. You know what? Let's jump into the show now. Kent Beck joined me. Had a blast. Let me know what you think in the show notes. Leave me a comment. Leave me a tweet.
Welcome to Agile for Humans. Our goal is to bring humanity back into the world of software delivery with Agile values, principles, and practices. We gather top Agilists from around the globe to share insights and help you grow as servant leaders in your organizations. We seek to open minds, change hearts, and deliver value into the world. Now here is our host, professional Scrum trainer and Agile practitioner, Ryan Ripley.
All right, welcome to this week's episode of Agile for Humans. I'm your host, Ryan Ripley. I'm not even going to mess around with a crazy intro. We're just going to get right to it. Joining me this week is Kent Beck. Kent, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Am I the designated human today?
You are the designated human in the hot seat.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, so many of the listeners will know, and I've told this story a few times on the show already, I actually got into programming because of Kent. It's Kent's fault. And I'm sure he's sitting there wondering, why is it my fault? I read a book, and y'all might have heard of this book, Extreme Programming Explained. I read this book a number of years ago. I've actually got the second edition sitting on my desk right now. That book opened up the world of programming to me. It actually, the human side of things, the principles and values that go into the practices, it just had a massive influence. So Kent, first and foremost, thank you for a career. I've enjoyed it.
Good.
But secondly, this book, just an awesome impact. And I'm curious, because this book came out a number of years ago, a lot of amazing ideas.
A large number, yes.
Very large number. A lot of great ideas in it that we're still seeing companies trying to adapt and inspect and adopt, hopefully, eventually. What are some of the ideas?
Avoid. There's another A word. Avoid.
Avoid. Yes.
Man, I'm feeling it today. I hope you're ready. Are you buckled in, Ryan?
I'm buckled in.
Excellent.
So those were the ideas then. I still think they're amazing ideas now. Are you still sharpening these ideas, or what's on your mind these days? Where is your focus at?
I really have two areas of active thinking / research right at now. One is how the development process, software development process, and product development process more broadly changes as the risk profile of a project changes. So in the early days, when you're looking for a new reinforcing loop, where the bigger you grow, the easier it is to grow bigger. That's the profit. That's the gold, the vein of gold ore in the software world is one of these reinforcing loops. As you're searching for a new one of those, you want to try to. You want a lot of diversity. You want to try crazy ideas. The latency between, here's an idea and, that's how users behave should be as short as possible. But that kind of behavior is completely different than the kind of behavior that you should exhibit when you have one of those loops. You've found one, you've developed it, now you have a thriving business. all of a sudden you've got a lot to lose, and the behavior should shift dramatically. So something like extreme programming, which purports to say, well, here's at least a starting point for all of software development, misses this distinction. And so I call this 3X for explore, expand, extract. And the expand in the middle is when you're going through vertical growth. That is, again, its own discipline of engineering, discipline of project management, discipline of finance, of people management, of staffing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one big area is about 5 years into my tenure at Facebook, I noted that these projects were treated very differently at Facebook, and to a much greater degree than any other large, especially a large organization that I'd ever seen, where explore projects were handled one way and extract projects were handled another, and then there were these vertical growth that required kind of emergency intervention that was its own way of working and being. So that's one area that I'm working on. Another area, more geeky, technical kind of area, is about scaling software development collaboration. Again, inspired by my time at Facebook, I could see it's a big organization. It's getting bigger. It's getting harder to collaborate on development. What would it take for 100,000 people to work on the same system at the same time? And the one thing that everybody agrees on is that smaller changes are better, but the changes can't get too small because you've got this whole blocking asynchronous code review process going on. So as is my way, I thought, well, let's just take this to the extreme. What if you drop the cost of introducing a change to zero? How small would the changes then be? And so the project's called Limbo, because the Limbo song asks, how low can you go? And we want so it's an exploration for how small you could make changes and how quickly you could propagate them. And then finding out, well, what does that do to the social organization of software development when you have this essentially zero overhead, change mechanism? What does that look like? Technically, what does it look like? Socially, what does it look like? How does it change project management, finance, forecasting, all that other stuff? So those are two big areas of research. Like there's a lot of unsolved problems. And then a third thing, I'm going to start a full-time gig here in a couple of weeks, and I had a couple of unexpected weeks free. So I decided I'm just going to see how much of a book on software design I can write in 2 weeks. So that's my mornings, is just busting it, writing as much as I can. Turns out I have strong opinions. I realize that's going to be a shock to you and the listeners about software design. And I have always had a hard time explaining myself. I have some specialized vocabulary, and I bring an odd collection of thinking tools to how I think about software design. So I'm seeing if I can write a book in 2 weeks.
A book in 2 weeks sounds awesome. Let's start with explore, expand, extract. Like this, I really like the mining analogy that you're going with here, because there's a show on TV. I don't know if you've watched this before, called Gold Rush, and this is my guilty pleasure, right?
Oh yeah.
And so they just pull a bunch of gold out of the ground. They do a bunch of digging. They wash the rocks. They extract the gold, and they're always trying to expand their empires. And I'm thinking about product development in the similar vein, and what I've seen in many of the Fortune 500 companies that I've worked in is that once they find that initial vein, that initial cash cow, that initial, I'm going to stick with mining, they find that ore streak, right? They put big fences around it and defend it like crazy and stop looking for anything else.
Yep.
And so we have this mentality of protect instead of explore and expand, right?
Well, I think it's worse than that. I think that they forget what it took to find that in the first place. Because those extractors, those are the people that look like responsible adults, right? They have projects. They can analyze the costs and benefits before they start. Things go pretty much on time, like certainly related in comparison to these explore projects, which are just failing left and right. And if they achieve something, that was completely unpredictable. Like, who wants that in a company? So companies get really good at extracting and they forget exploration entirely.
Yeah, I wonder if exploration, though, I wonder if that's such a scary word. I think about, I mean, even, you've brought up Facebook a few times. That was initially a need at a college, right? Or it was more of a want, but it was scratching an itch, literally, right? I wonder if we've forgotten that that's where most of product innovation comes from. Living in the world, noticing things in the world, and seeing things a little differently, and trying to solve a real problem. And that's not as chaotic, perhaps, as we make it out to be.
Well, it's chaotic for me. I mean, the approach, the mindset, like, oh, I'm gonna go around the world being tuned to unmet needs. I think that you're right. That is not chaotic. That's just a habit of thinking.
Right.
But many more people seem to have the habit of thinking, well, whatever my unmet needs are in the world, I'm just going to have to learn how to adapt to it. It's like the quote about how all progress depends on unreasonable people.
I think that's very true. And then trying to channel those unreasonable people in positive ways can also be an interesting challenge.
Well, yeah, it's a channel, like, you can't manage that in some sort of linear sense.
And do you think that's really the issue? This because whether you're adopting Agile, you're doing Scrum, you're doing XP, you're doing product research or development, I wonder if it's this illusion of control, this desire for predictability, this nothing bad can happen mentality. Is this really what's costing companies this competitive edge, or this ability to actually explore, right?
Well, I think there's a legitimate concern, which is if you're going to manage projects in all three phases at the same time, the task of management becomes more complicated. Like, I guarantee you can't just apply OKRs to everything.
Right.
Like, I talked to one manager at Facebook who was exploring new ads, and he was really frustrated with the OKR, because either he had zero revenue or he had 100 times his goal. And exploration, you're looking for thumbs up, thumbs down. Is this one of the things that's going to blow up in some unpredictable way? Or is it just one of the many things which sounded like a good idea until we did it? And you have to be prepared for lots and lots of, oh, no, that's not going to work out. Oh, no, that's not going to work out. Boom. Oh, what about this one? So, like, I use Twitter for this. If I want to know what of the things I talk about that my audience on Twitter wants to hear me talk about, I could carefully craft the messages and do little focus groups and have an editor go over. You know what? When the difference in the number of impressions of a tweet for me is 30-1 from my sort of normal tweet to something that's the most popular one that I've ever put out there, 30-1. And at the moment that I press tweet, and thank you, Twitter, for giving me the opportunity to press a button called tweet multiple times a day. At the moment that I press that button, I have no idea if this is going to be a 1x or a 30x. I cannot predict. If I try to predict, I'm just wrong all the time. The most popular tweets are not something I would have expected. So if I'm in that mode, if I'm in that world where I can't predict, then my best investment strategy is just, as long as a tweet is not patently stupid or offensive, I should just put it out there, because I don't know if this is going to be one of the ones that has an impact, or if it's one of the many that seems to vanish.
So do you think we have to have the misses to hit the home runs?
I think it's worse than that. I think the more misses you have, the larger the magnitude of the home run. In baseball, you can only get 1 run or 4 out of a home run. And no matter how many games of baseball you play, but in the world of these reinforcing loops, where you have a power law distribution,
right,
the longer you play baseball, the more runs you get from your biggest home run.
That's
so true. After 10 years, after a year, maybe you only get 4 runs, but after 10 years, you get 40 runs. And after 100 years of playing baseball, you'd get 400 runs for a home run. Right? We don't usually live in a world that's like that, or we're not aware that we're living in a world that's has these kind of positive feedback loops in it. But that's the way products work. And that's very foreign to, like, if you're making your analogies from sports.
Yeah, and so it's probably a poor analogy, but the idea there is, so companies that want that competitive advantage, and I'm assuming Facebook is doing this pretty frequently, is you want to learn and miss fairly often, so you have that amplifying effect or that possibility. You hit you find the winner, you get the thumbs up, you get the like. I mean, that can amplify out for years and years. So really, I guess maybe fail fast is the answer.
Well, I think we need a different word than fail.
I've always liked learn. What do you think of that?
Well, so you try this experiment, and it either validates your hypothesis or it invalidates your hypothesis.
So I wonder. I'm sorry.
You see where I'm going with this?
Oh, absolutely.
And so what is that word? We can't call it a failed experiment. It's only failed if you don't learn anything.
Right.
If we say, well, how will millennial San Franciscans act when given the opportunity to do X? I'm like, well, I think 10% of them are going to give us $1,000. Now we have a hypothesis. We run an experiment. The answer is no, they won't do that. That's not a failed experiment. That's a successful experiment. I mean, we'd rather have the $1,000.
Right.
But, because after all, that is the point. And at some point, we have to get the $1,000 or we're out of business. But it doesn't make it a failed experiment. So I think, and I don't have an answer to this. I don't know what that word is for we got the answer and it wasn't the one we hoped for.
Perhaps that's just serendipity, because if you're running an experiment and you know the outcome, it's no longer an experiment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's complexity. It's just.
At which point you shouldn't run it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Because either you're already doing it or somebody else is already doing it. So it's not worth it. If you don't know, if it's a coin flip, right? The maximum information is generated when your experiment is a coin flip.
I've always wondered how much of this product discovery stuff is accidental. Someone put a weird idea out there by accident. Someone forgot to carry the one. Someone misconfigured an ad type and it worked. I mean, have you seen things like that where completely accidental, but holy cow. I think the Post-it note is a good example of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's supposed to be adhesive. It's supposed to stick to things. And this goop doesn't stick to anything.
No. So if that's what's going on in our product development, it seems like rapid experimentation, shortest feedback loop possible, wide spectrum and diversity of ideas. Kent, this does not sound like the common corporation or company that I walk into. Well,
that's because they also have to take all the gold they can out of the veins they do find.
Right.
Right. If you don't do that, then the lights go off and then you don't get to keep exploring. So I think there are three different disciplines at work here. That's the mind changer for me in 3X. That there isn't management, there isn't development, there isn't programming. There are three different kinds. So another illustration I use is I take a bag, and in the bag are a soccer ball, an American football, and a rugby ball. And if the person wearing the black and white striped shirt blows the whistle and takes the soccer ball off the field and puts a rugby ball down, and a new opposing team comes trotting onto the field, if you keep playing soccer and the game has changed to rugby, you're going to get crushed. It's not bad soccer. It's just a different game with different rules and different trade-offs. That's in the same way that expansion is not bad exploration because you're focused on one existential threat at a time. It's just a new game. You entered a new phase, and extraction isn't bad exploration, or vice versa. They're just different games.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's and then the type of ball dictates the game, right? What if you tried to play soccer with a rugby ball?
Yeah, and it's worse than that because the opposing team has changed too.
More complexity.
So you have large, aggressive people tackling you. Well, hey, wait a minute. That's not how soccer is played. That's right.
Rugby is large, insane people tackling you. You forgot that part. But many listeners, including Todd Miller, who's out there listening, is a huge rugby fan, and I'm sure he'll forgive me for that.
Good.
It's a fascinating...
You better hope he will.
Well, because, he's one of those large rugbyers. It's this fascinating area, right? And I think it's one that I think this product development area is really going to become, maybe it's the post-Agile thing, maybe it's the new... I just think it's that shifting the focus to the customer. What does this customer truly want? How do we know that they truly want that? Have we validated that what we built is truly what they wanted? And what are all the measures and ways to manage that? But I like this idea of looking for minerals, because we don't know where things are at. We can do drill testing. We can run soil samples from thousands of different areas. Even though something that looks positive, it may turn out it was just a small vein. It wasn't a large vein. But then you get into, let's say we actually find, we get to this area of, we have found value, right? We have figured out that a new ad configuration looks good. We figured out that, changing the algorithm and, deprioritizing certain types of pages made the users happier. Whatever it is that we're doing on a platform, what does that expand step look like, Kent?
Well, and this is derived from coaching a couple hundred Facebook engineers. Whenever you find a new source of value, it doesn't matter how good your infrastructure is, you're going to break it. All of a sudden, you're running out of, and it's one thing after another. You're running out of disk space, and then you're running out of network bandwidth, and then you're running out of server floor space, and then you're running out of office space, and then you can't recruit fast enough, and then. Right. And the thing about that expansion phase is every single one of those barriers that you hit is an existential crisis. So if you don't find some way to band-aid your way around it, then you didn't win in the first place. So exploration, you're just trying a bunch of stuff. You're trying goofy stuff. Sometimes you're trying irrational stuff just because who knows? It's cheap, may as well. And then something takes off. And when it takes off, it is, per definition, going to be a use of your resources you haven't seen before. So now you have to become aware of what that new rate limiting resource is. And then you have to find some way to reduce the demand for that resource and increase the supply just enough so that it doesn't kill you, and get ready for the next one. So, now more photos are being uploaded, and then you run out of disk space. And then so you solve that problem, and then the bandwidth isn't high enough, and you solve that problem, and another thing and another thing. But that requires extreme focus. You have one metric that, if it isn't addressed, is going to kill you, and you address that, and then you find the next metric that's going to kill you if it's not addressed, which is very different than the exploration behavior, where you want to keep doing goofy stuff until something pops unexpectedly. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. I think it reminds me of Jerry Weinberg and Rudy's Rutabaga problem, where
yes,
you solve your biggest problem, and congratulations, your second biggest problem gets a promotion to the first, and it will hit you just as hard as the one you just solved did. And
like whoever wants to be the Guinness Book of World Records oldest person, that person keeps dying.
Exactly.
It's, and then, I'm number 3 on the list. I'm number 2. This is it.
I'm happy to lose that one.
Exactly.
So it's interesting, right? The explore, the expand. It reminds me of a tweet you fired off, because I keep an eye on your feed from time to time. And
thank you.
I really enjoyed, and if the listeners out there, if you're not following Kent, what are you doing? But you fired one off that by the time you
being productive.
Being productive, yes. Social media.
Sorry,
bad.
Was that one of those rhetorical questions I've heard about?
No, you're good. I agree with you. I have less social media, more work. But by the time you make a big bet, it better not be a bet. And I thought that was really clever, because we're always talking about big bets in these meetings and in these companies. But man, by the time you put the chips down, you better not be gambling, right?
Well, I mean, there are degenerate gamblers. I'm a avid amateur poker player. There are people who do it and who do losing plays over and over again because they enjoy it on those rare occasions they win. So that's fine behavior. It's just not a way to run a business.
Absolutely. So
I think there's something macho about that. Oh, I'm going to make a big bet. Like, no. You shouldn't. You should wait until it's an absolute certainty and then pour the money on it.
Well, most people don't even realize, you brought up poker, that most of the time when we're playing poker, unless there's been a little too much alcohol, we're not actually gambling.
Correct.
It's all math. We're looking at different ranges of hands versus what's on the board based on betting behavior, based on past behavior. We're making some logical inferences, some guessing, we're creating some models in our head, and we're saying, I've got a 1% edge here. I should put some money in the pot. Or it's likely that my range is going to fall flat into his range, and he's got me beat, and I'm drawing dead. I should quit. But it's not a gamble. There's so much information. It's imperfect and it's incomplete, but it's really not gambling at a certain level of play, right?
Well, if you go long enough, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, over time. The variance is what gets everybody in the end, right?
Well, no, variance gets you today. In the end, it doesn't. In the end, it all balances out.
We would hope. Well, unless you run like I do, and then you have to stop playing for a while.
I just finished one of those enforced hiatuses.
Very nice. So another tweet that I wanted to throw at you real quick. I thought Cat Sweattle put something out that I really liked, that XP is not dead. It's just not where you left it. Such an amazing tweet, right? And we've been actually talking about this on the Agile for Humans Slack channel. A lot of people. So Kent, you've actually busted my chops a little bit for being a Scrum trainer in front of a lot of people in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Live, yes.
Live, yeah. It was what was it? The the scourge of certifications?
No. The scourge is your minimization. I said, how will we eliminate the cancer of certifications?
Yes. And I think I stammered like this for a little bit and then went on, but
no. So here's the thing about certifications. Since you brought it up, and we should get back to Cat Suite because that was extremely clever and insightful. But the thing about certification, I'm not anti-certification. I am pro-incentive alignment.
yes.
And what I see is there are ways of doing certification where everybody's incentives are aligned. Board certified physicians, for example. It really means something. The people doing the certification don't get paid for it. It's a professional obligation. So if somebody says I'm a board certified surgeon, I'm going to trust you at a different level because the incentives are closer to aligned. Now, if you go back to Hammurabi and if the house falls down, the builders, and your child is killed, then one of the builder's children is put to death. That even takes it another level. I don't need to actually go to that level, but that is a case of severely aligned incentives. The ones that I don't like is when the incentives are diametrically opposed. What would be good for one party in a transaction would be actively bad for the other. And some ways of doing certification are set up that way.
No,
End of rant.
No, totally. I think that's a great stance on it. I do totally agree. To Kat's comment, and I thought, again, super clever tweet. It came up in the channel where one of our listeners, Marcus, he asked, when you think about Scrum and XP and SAFe and all of those things, do you think XP didn't get the traction because it didn't have a certification? Or is that even a fair statement that it didn't get the traction that the others did?
Well, I mean, it lost in the marketplace of ideas. Depending on how you keep score. But as a thing, so it certainly didn't lose because we didn't have certifications. That was a very conscious choice, very deliberate, kind of over my dead body. I took that stand because I couldn't see how to do certifications in a way that aligned everybody's incentives. I think Scrum was very successful because it had a better marketing plan than extreme programming. I think that the larger scale advice around software development, whether it's safe or less or whatever, I think they also chose, they're speaking to CTOs. The XP was talking to teams. I gave a back in the like go days of extreme programming, I gave a keynote in Tokyo at some anniversary of one of the largest IT publications in Japan, and afterwards, it seemed to go flat for me, even for Japan, like just not a lot of reaction. And I asked somebody who uncomfortably told me that I was talking about 10 or 20 people working together and no one in the room had fewer than 1,000 people reporting to them. So what was the, like, what message did I have that they could take away? And I had to think, I don't know. I'm not sure what they could take away from what I said. So I think that limited things. And then I think there were a couple of moments. A very large electronics manufacturer came to a group of us that were doing XP training early on And they had 4 or 5 people at this training. By the end of the week, they sat us down and said, okay, it's a go. We would like training for 10,000. Wow. And we stood on our principles and said, by gum, we don't know how to teach 10,000 people. So we're not going to, with integrity, we can't possibly meet this need. And that was the end. So there's an element of luck. If we had a way to scale it like that, and our answer wasn't strictly factual, right? Could we have, if somebody had really, like if we hadn't panicked in that moment and said, all right, let's just assume we're going to do this. How can we do this the best we can? It's not going to be as good as if we've got 8 really high-level instructors in one room, but it can be something, right? So how quickly can we reach how many people with decent training? We could have come up with something. Instead, we panicked. And a moment like that can make all the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how. I mean, that's really the expand, right? I still believe.
Yes, exactly right.
XP is a goal, is a vein, and it's a very wide one. I've yet to meet a developer, even today. Like when I manage, or when I used to manage, I'm now out of that, off that treadmill for a while. But when I would manage developers or even work as a scrum master with dev teams, when I fall into that role from time to time, everyone gets a copy of that book. Everyone gets Extreme Programming Explained, and I've yet to meet a dev who, once they read it, sometimes you have to convince them that, yes, it's worth reading, because when a manager or a scrum master hands them a book, they think it's touchy-feely and not valuable. But once they read it, I've yet to meet a developer who's looked at it and said, nah. I mean, they love this book. And so I think what you're talking about is that expand phase. What can you extract from that particular experience and what could fall forward? Because I mean, selfishly, Kent, I'll cut to the chase. My question is, when does the 3rd edition come out and when does it resurge?
Yep. Well, I think to Kat's point, it's been a big surprise to me. Okay, so here's the part that wasn't a surprise. There are people out there who've kind of been doing XP underground, some of them for the last 20 years, some of them for 10 years, some of them for 5 years. They found a copy of the book on their parents' bookshelf and read it and just thought, well, why don't I try this? And they're really good at it. And to Kat's point, some of the new people are doing things in ways that we old folks didn't anticipate back then. But it's better in the sense that it's more shaped to the cultural zeitgeist. It's more shaped to the technical constraints of projects today. So I knew that there were both newer and more experienced practitioners who wanted to get the word out. The big surprise for me over the past maybe 6 months is on the demand side. I gave a talk at a big telco in China, and I wanted to talk about 3X and the stuff I was really excited about. And they said, actually, would you mind going over that extreme programming stuff one more time? And it just blew me away. I was going into rants that I hadn't ranted in 15 years, about managing projects with variable scope and whatever. There's demand. There are people out there who are now saying, well, okay, we liked the promise of Agile. XP sounded like it was going to be a lot of work. So we just had stand-up meetings for the last 10 years, and that's not working out. Would you please tell us about that XP stuff again? So I think there is an opportunity for a reboot of extreme programming. It's not going to look the same way the way it's expressed is not going to be the same. Some of the people involved are not going to be the same people. Some are. How the word gets out there. I think there is an opportunity to reboot the franchise, to kind of take another run at the fence and say, okay. There really is a way for software development to create much more value than it is creating today. That was the point from the beginning, right? I have this, I don't know if you've heard me go on this rant about 3 billion seconds. In the Christian Bible, it talks about the tale of a man's life is 70 years and 10. So 70 years, that's a lifespan. Well, we live longer than that now. So I talk about 3 billion seconds, which is about 92 years, which is about how long younger people are going to live. And those 3 billion seconds are ticking away. And the original motivation with XP is I just saw people wasting so many of those seconds doing stuff that just couldn't possibly matter. And that reality is still the reality today. And I have a hard time holding it together when I think about how many people are doing how much less than they could with the time they have here. And we have big problems. We need everybody with their talents working at 100% if we're going to get through this. So, yeah, I think there is an opportunity out there to take those ideas, to recast them in the language of the moment and propagate them in the style of the moment. And yeah, I think that could come back.
Well, and I actually see limbo, as you were talking through that, as kind of the next incarnation, or at least that combined with, stuff on, Woody Zull's work on mob programming, or all these other scaling collaboration, and we're getting that cost of change, or at least the overhead of change, down to zero. I mean, that's absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure people heard that at the top of the show and they thought, well, how would we even get to that point? And I know this is something else that you're excited about. When you think about, trying to scale collaboration, getting that overhead of change down to zero. I mean, I don't think you're just talking about, checking into master all the time and just continuous integration and automation. I mean, there's something more to that, isn't it? Or isn't there?
Well, what more does there need to be? I mean, you have to do that in a way that doesn't break stuff all the time.
So what I loved about XP, a lot of your rants, even your keynote in South Africa that we got to see, you've also brought in the human element to the work, right? So we've got the automation is there, continuous integration is there. I agree all that stuff's necessary, but you've also, I think you brought principles, or at least a principled approach to software development. That's one of the things that really stood out in Extreme Programming Explained, that you can do all of these practices, but they come rote unless there's principles and values behind them. What are the principles and values that we use as we're scaling collaboration so that we can get as low as we can go?
Well, I think a big one, and this comes back to this incentive alignment, I think aligning authority and responsibility and keeping them aligned is the central organizational problem. It's just so easy for the people who can break things not to have to fix them.
True. And
I don't know how far I'm willing to go at this point about that, but that's what I want to see, that, okay, if you can break it, then you're responsible for fixing it. And then I think software, especially as we begin to have world-shaping consequences, single software systems now have a significant effect on world society, on climate, on safety, on commerce. We have to start learning from the safety cultures in the world, whether it's medicine, aeronautics, space, transportation. There are people who've been thinking about how to take really complicated situations and wring every last bit of safety out of them for decades. And the explorations only can take place in a atmosphere of safety. Right? You need for there to be not a lot to lose in order to explore freely. But that doesn't happen, especially in a big organization. That doesn't happen at random, right? If I'm trying out new products inside of a gigantic bank, I need to do that in a way that can't possibly, in anyone's imagination, affect the regular operations of the bank. Now, every once in a while, we're going to be surprised. Say, "Ooh, I didn't know that the thing was connected with the other thing," and that ended up being a big problem. But when that happens, then you have to learn everything you can about that situation so that you can rectify the situation and make sure that something like that can't possibly happen again. I don't know if you know Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon.
I do not.
It's an entire city block. It's the best bookstore in the world, in English for sure. And I remember you've just run across crazy books. I found a book that detailed every fatal commercial aviation accident in the history of commercial aviation and what was learned from each accident. And, it doesn't anyway, I was just fascinated because, you don't put this switch next to that switch when accidentally flipping one when you mean to flip the other one means everyone dies. Like, who knew? Now we know that. Now we don't put those switches next to each other. And it's things like that every little niggling detail that creates safety in aviation is there because somebody died. And you can't prevent absolutely people from dying, but you can make sure that it doesn't happen twice. And yes, I'm gonna let go of the temptation to take a cheap shot at recent events. But as software systems begin to have these global effects, we have to incorporate that kind of wisdom into what we do. At the same time, we have to continue exploring and trying out crazy ideas while the consequences, potential negative consequences, are low, so that we can actually realize the potential of computing to contribute to human wellness.
Well, Kent, I think that's a great place for us to leave off on this conversation. I know you've got a hard stop in a few minutes here, and I want to be respectful of your time. I've loved this. I really appreciate all you've done for the software community. This has been a true pleasure, and it's just been it's great to have another conversation with you. This part of the show, Kent, it's all for you. Anything you'd like to promote, anything that you want to get in front of listeners, anything that, and actually how people can continue the conversation, whether it's a Twitter handle, website, anything you'd like to share, the floor is yours.
On Twitter, you can find me at Kent Beck. One of the advantages of getting in early is you get your own name. On the web, you can find me at kentbeck.com. Not a lot of stuff up there at the moment, but you can get on my mailing list. This as yet unnamed software design book that I can't even tell you where to follow it or anything, but look for that. should be hitting a bookstore near you in the next somewhere between 2 months and 4 years. And those are all ways you can get in touch with me.
Well, Kent, again, thank you so much for doing this. Really, I'm going to put. I have some links to the Explore, Expand, Extract. I think you've got some posts out there on that. Definitely, we'll share that with the listeners. I find it fascinating to think about exploration, but also the safety of it and creating the safe environments. And I think there's a lot of great material to mine there. Pun intended, maybe hashtag dad joke. But I think it's awesome stuff, and I can't wait to see where this goes. So thank you again for sharing that, and thank you again for doing the show.
Hey, my pleasure, Ryan. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to talking to you again sometime in the future.
All right. Thanks, Kent.